Welcome back to What the Hype. We're talking about Back to the Future Part 3 now, which is very exciting. I just want to hear everything from Pam, who said it is the one she watched the least, or at least recently. Hello, Pam. What are your thoughts about Back to the Future 3 overall?
Overall, I said this at the beginning of the show, I really took what you had said about the threequel, if you will, to heart. It was a lot more charming than I remember it being. And I think that going into it with the mindset that it's meant to be a much slower pace, as a result just of the fact that they don't have a lot of the same technology, really made it a little bit more palatable. I still feel like, and I think that the disconnect for me is that the pacing is so fast for 1 and 2. And so as a result, if you're watching them all back to back for whatever reason, the pacing of 3 feels a little off. It feels a little slower. But if you think about it in the context of the fact that maybe it's supposed to be that way because of the time in which they're living, and maybe it's also supposed to be that way so that you understand why Doc wants to stay there, I think that really does kind of help it go down a little easier.
Yeah, I think too the genre is different slightly. Like I think the pace can be slower because they're telling a love story at the end of the day too, and I couldn't see it working where they tell a love story or something that amounts to a love story with the fast breakneck pace of like the second or first films. So that is kind of my take on the slower pace, in addition to the change in eras. But I think that what Part 3 represents to me is a character study, and the first time since first stepping into the time machine that we're able to get more than a passing look at even our main characters. And somebody made the case. I've been watching some YouTube videos. Heavy Spoilers is the name of the channel that I've been watching. And I think Paul's his name pointed out that people could watch Part 3 right after watching Part 1 as a 1-2 punch, skipping Part 2 entirely. And the reason is you start off the film, the third film, with 1950s Doc and future Marty. And also, anything important about sort of the darkness and the plot of the second film can actually be, it's said by Marty. Like he mentions Biff getting the book, and he mentions leaving Jennifer on a porch somewhere. So it's stuff that you really don't need the second film to appreciate that the third film is going to end up paying off these characters. And so as a conclusion to the trilogy, I think getting the characters to have a little bit more development, Marty overcoming his people calling him chicken thing, Doc finding, something that he loves as much as science that isn't science, but ultimately doing the right thing and getting to kind of choose his own destiny. There's a lot more. There's a line that Mary Steenburgen as Clara says to Doc about how they, having met, might have been destiny. And for a film franchise that's about time travel, you don't often hear that. You haven't heard that word up until that point. And I think that's what the third film represents for me, is they get to ask the question about destiny. Like Marty changes his fate in the first 2 films, but we don't really talk about it in the sense of what is meant to be. What is the universe telling us? And so having this character of Clara, who by all accounts should have died, falling down a ravine that the teachers, as a school teacher, the kids' future tell the story about, is crazy. But the fact that she was saved because first Doc and now Doc and Marty were there at the right time to save her means that she is a person without a time. She is a person without a destiny. She's a person who, what if our heroes were ever to wed and felt strongly about not altering the timeline? Now you get a free pass because this person wasn't supposed to be alive to begin with. So there's a lot of again, economy, and there's a lot of I think smart writing here that guide our characters to, through to the conclusion, and don't end up going against the morals or the decision making that's been touted in the previous films.
And that's important because you don't want to go changing the rules that people have, you've taught people, right? But yeah, I just I never thought about it as what you said, which I think is very clever, that she exists out of time, and so that's why she doesn't, taking her to the future, for example, it does not have any consequences, or any real ramifications. I kind of thought it was more of like, well, this was an inflection point they didn't realize was on the horizon all along. It's like a tentpole. It's supposed to happen, and it's supposed to happen the way it does. So it's something that is unchanging. So even though Doc says, he's like, I'm not going to meet Clara, it's fine. It's like some crazy shit happens and he ends up saving her and doesn't even realize that that's who he was meant to meet all along. And that kind of ties into what you were saying about her saying that some things are destiny, or that she was meant to meet him because it was destiny. So
I love the idea
it is very romantic to see like a man of science like accepts that,
completely fall for somebody.
It's like there's no reason or like rhyme or fact to destiny, and yet he's just like all in,
Yeah, and the unpredictability of enough is exciting, and even the fact that he's been living in 1885 for 8 or 9 months at that time, but hasn't met Clara yet. And so when Marty shows him the tombstone and it says like "Beloved Clara," he still doesn't know who she is. Who is this?
Right.
Who is this woman? This is absurd.
Yeah, he's like, I'm not going to fall in love in like a week when I die.
But then it happens.
But then it happens, like, exactly.
It feels meant to be. It feels so. In that way, in addition to everything else the movie does, I think it manages to tread new ground in an exciting way. It is ultimately hilarious to see 1950s Doc again. Watching Marty have to kind of reconvince him. The joke about junk made in Japan. Sort of like the casual technophobe racism of 1950s unpolished Doc, only to be told, "What do you mean, Doc? Some of the best stuff is made in Japan." Crazy kind of gaffes and. Dressing Marty in that multicolored cowboy suit, thinking that it's
he's like, who dressed you in that? It's like, you did.
What idiot dress? Yeah. It just it's hilarious, and the film, in addition to introducing Marty to his own ancestors too, in the McFlys, played by himself, Michael J. Fox and Leah Thompson, I think add another element of heart and responsibility and destiny to the whole picture. So I actually like Part 3 as a contained film that is no less fancy or pretty looking as the first two, but manages to explore the characters, I think, in a way just the first two films are preoccupied with other stuff to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the setting is like, the set is just like perfect in terms of like old Western. It's like everything you want from it. The town saloon, the train tracks, the fact that the DeLorean is like living out in the mines, that they had like hid it there. It's like, pitch perfect in every way.
Yeah. And to mention it too, some of these other actors that are, in the background that nevertheless create, I think, are really responsible. They do a lot of heavy lifting. The bartender character, Chester, is exactly what you would expect to see in like a saloon. He's like a good-natured person. The barflies, the trio of just gentlemen that are always there in the saloon, with their funny accents. Look at what just breezed in.
This is going towards the end, but like when Marty decides that he'll go do the standoff with Mad Dog, and he's like, "What are you measuring me for?" And he's like, "The coffin, of course."
Like this guy's got a job to do. Yeah,
exactly.
The Undertaker. Yeah. So it's hilarious to see the town dynamics and all this other stuff get thrown into the movie that don't need to be there. This could just be a romp, Doc and Marty in the Old West. Seeing the town, because the town of Hill Valley is always supposed to have been a character and like never quite makes it, I think, in the previous films, you really get to see the residents of this place in like a deeper light. So I really like that as well. But yeah, Part 3, especially with getting to explore the characters, I want to talk about a moment between Doc and Marty where like Doc is telling Marty that he's not going to go with him the next day to go back to the future, and that he's in love with Clara, and he's gonna have to, he can't break her heart. He's gonna have to abandon Marty. And for Marty to then say, but you're a scientist, think about what the right thing is to do up here, not in your heart. I love this moment in the film because Chris Lloyd takes a moment, as Doc, he takes a moment and then says, you're right. So it's a testament to Doc and Marty's friendship that, and how much they respect one another, that one can change the other's mind. And that, I think, to me, speaks to more directly to their friendship and their history together than anything in the other films at all, is when you have a character with a want and they feel very strongly about something, but then the other character talks them out of it, not flippantly, but because the stakes couldn't be higher. They're going to leave each other. They're never going to see each other again if Doc makes this decision. To be able to actually convince Doc that, no, the right thing to do is to say goodbye to Clara, and then he goes and does it, and then, the rest of the film happens. But, like, the fact that they respect each other enough for Doc to listen to Marty and then to make that decision, and I'm just glad it all works out in the end. But that, to me, is an example of why this film stands out. And, I could make the case that this is the best one of the three, because there's that level of, like, real lived, I think, character experience here, where you don't often see that.
Yeah, and I think that it's funny that you mentioned that, because I think one of the things that we talked about in the first episode we recorded for this little mini series is that despite the fact that there's an age gap between these two characters, and despite the fact that Doc is a very smart inventor, he at no point does he ever belittle Marty, and you see that there's a lot of trust between them, just in the in the way that, like, when Back to the Future opens, Marty's just like chilling in Doc's lab, and it doesn't bother him that he, like, blows out the amp or anything like that. He's just like, of course, he never treats him like a kid or like scolds him for making mistakes and stuff like that. And I think that what makes that trust element that you talk about when Marty convinces him that the right thing to do is to let Claire go, all that more beautiful is that that's not even, like, he's not technically even his Doc from 1985, right? He's still the Doc from 1955 that he goes back to save. Is that how that works? Am I getting that right?
It's the 1985 Doc
in the past
that went with him to 2015 and then got struck by the car's lightning and then ended up in 1885. So it is
it is his Doc. Okay,
it's the Doc. Yeah, it's
that's
the Doc
the part that I was confused about. But but I do think that, like, the trust element there too is, like, that no matter, like, which Doc it is, he's just like, of course, I trust you immediately, whether that's 1955 Doc or 1985 Doc. I think that speaks volumes to not only Doc's character, but also just, like, this intrinsic bond that these two characters have.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is so, again, about the 1955 versus 85 Doc, we've seen only Marty has been the same, because Marty goes back to 85 from 55, but actually this Marty that we have in movie 3 is not the same Marty that this Doc got to know, because Marty changed his own future and his parents are cool now, but the Doc that knew that Marty grew up and then was shot and then saved himself, but the way that the Marty works is that Marty assumes that role in 85. So it's just interesting. But these two men's friendship, and I actually really like the addition of Clara too. I can see, if these films were made today, I can see modern internet incel culture being very rude about, why is there a woman all of a sudden? This is the Doc and Marty show. Who's this woman? There must have been I mean, a less toxic but still prevalent thought to these, teen boys watching the film in the 90s going, we don't like that our Doc is straying from Marty, and who's this woman? She plays a character that's in time, so she doesn't have the luxury of having like a modern version, Mary Steenburgen, playing a woman from the 1880s who you nevertheless have to believe is from the 1880s, who you nevertheless have to believe is in love with Doc, also falling very ridiculously fast for a character. And I just love that you buy her appreciation toward his kindness and her own wants and interests aligning perfectly with his. The film does so much, but really, I think Clara is one of the better characters in it, because you believe her.
Mm-hmm. And I think what really seals the deal for audiences too is that despite the fact that Marty takes the time to convince Doc to come back and leave her in the past where she belongs, at the end of the day, in that incredible runaway train sequence, for lack of a better word, as soon as Clara's life becomes endangered, he all of a sudden just springs into action. He's like, how do I save Doc? How do I save this woman that he clearly cares a lot about? Like, he's like, he knows that he's on a time crunch, but he still figures out how to get that hoverboard over so that the two of them, are able to, get to safety. And just also, like, it's like, that's the ultimate sacrifice of love, right? Is like letting someone go. Like, of course he wants Doc to go back with him to the future, but he knows in that moment that, that he's chosen to stay, and that it's okay.
Again, taking stock of what matters. What is more important? Doc being alive, and Doc being happy, and Doc being potentially more happy than he would be anywhere else.
And it's bittersweet. It's bittersweet, and but I think that, like, because Marty at that moment makes peace with the fact that he probably will never see him again, we as the audience then make peace with the fact that these are where these two characters part ways.
I mean, what we just talked about, how crazy is it that the Back to the Future trilogy gets something like that moment with these characters? Yeah,
there's a lot of heart for something that really is supposed to be just like a fun romp.
Well, and I'm not here to talk about how ridiculous the steam-powered train locomotive time machine is in the trilogy.
Incredible.
I'm not gonna say anything pro or against how absolutely insane the ending of the third film is.
Right.
But it's wistful and hopeful, and gosh darn it, it's just fun, and getting to wrap everything up in a bow. I'm glad Marty goes to get Jennifer. And the fact that she gets to ask Doc. We don't ever see their relationship, really. We assume because Doc is a friend of Marty, he's met Jennifer before, played by a different actress. But, we don't see them really interact until Doc is like, well, it means the future's not written and you can make it a good one.
Yeah.
And it's just like so hopeful as like a button on the franchise that I think really is a little twee, but ultimately far more entertaining and far better than it needs to be, for a movie that just is a fun romp through time.
Yeah, it's a nice sentiment to leave an audience on, right? As Doc goes off to fly off who knows where with his family, and then as Marty and Jennifer prepare for their own adventure, right? It's like the future is what you make it. I think that's just such a lovely way to put a bow on it. Is a little cheesy, maybe, arguably, but I think it works.
I think it's earned.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
You get the sense that the characters earn, like Marty through his character development, through deciding not to race needles.
Right.
Never would have even been there for the finale, Doc's arrival in the train, if he had chosen he would have been injured. He would have been. So I think that there's some joy in you get the happy ending because you did make that choice, and you're rewarded, I think, for doing you and leading with your heart and being optimistic. There's a lot of good value and morals. Again, the film at the end goes by pretty quick, but there's a lot to take out of it in terms of meaning and how it makes you feel, I think, is what makes this film as valid an entry, and also in some ways like a real darn good part 3 conclusion to what the trilogy that was only ever just a really fun single film, later made into a trilogy, was supposed to be. So I'm really, really happy with it. Mm-hmm. Any other moments from part 3 that stand out, or any other things you wanted to mention before we wrap up our discussion?
I think we got everything in there. Yeah, or at least I did. I feel like we did a good job touching on the highlights there.
Yeah, I think it manages to be funny in the dialogue too. The fact that 1955's Doc and 1885's Doc both tell Marty he isn't thinking fourth dimensionally, and he's like, "Yeah, I have a real problem with that." Like, it's self-effacing and just awareness. My only thing is I'm still looking for that whiskey that they pour down that smokes when you pour it. I really just want to I want to believe, I want to experience that a strong enough whiskey exists that looks just like that whiskey in the 1880s, because everything back then was not filtered at all and was so much worse for you.
You're basically drinking rubbing alcohol.
Yeah, basically. Maybe dry ice, but I know you can smoke whiskey, but it's not the same as pouring whiskey, that when it hits the dusty wood, it begins to dry ice. So there's a lot of love, a lot of joy, seeing Strickland in the 1880s as well, or his grandfather, great-grandfather, how some characters never the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. I think there's some ruminations, there's some history repeating itself going on in some of these other characters and these other little moments in the film that altogether feel like the same thing that the other films were doing. And so this film does feel, again, very familiar in those ways. So thank you for chatting with me about Back to the Future Part 3. I'm so glad that you got some enjoyment out of it after rewatching it for the first time in a long time. I, as always, still get a lot out of it every time I watch it. And that train sequence, nothing looks as nice as it, as cool as it, I think, in the whole series. So just something about trains, there's something about the old-fashionedness of it all that is very enticing, and the fact that if you take a mode of transport as cool as the DeLorean and take it back 70 years and have like a locomotive be the main sort of vehicle touched on in the film, is also feels like a fun jaunt. Mm-hmm. So we want to remind our listeners where to find us online, and want to thank everyone for tuning in for these parts of our discussion on Back to the Future. I can't wait to see if we ever revisit this trilogy or franchise in the future. But we are, of course, at What the Hype Podcast on all of our social medias, and on Twitter or X, we're What the Hype Show. Do check us out. Please subscribe and join us next time for our next topic in popular culture. And thank you, Pam, so much for your time.
Yeah, of course. It was fun.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.